battle between man versus nature. This is just a quote that I decided to add from Peter Benchley's Jaws. "Look, Chief, you can't go off half-cocked, looking for vengeance against a fish. That shark isn't evil, it's not a murderer, it's just obeying its own instincts. Trying to get retribution against a fish is crazy." So most of you have probably viewed the film adaptation of Jaws sometime in your life, but for my project, I will rather be focusing on the novel Jaws, written by Peter Benchley in 1974. And this date is important to the focus of my project, so make sure to keep this in mind because it will be brought up in the next few slides. So the novel Jaws was inspired by a couple shark attacks that Benchley had read, and mostly by the exploitation of a great white shark by a man named Frank Mundus, whom had killed a great white with a harpoon. The novel is set in a small, largely dependent tourist town called Amity in New England. The story follows a great white shark that preys upon the people and the three men, Police Commissioner Martin Brody, Matt Hooper, hired by Brody, and Quint, a shark hunter, all on a quest to stop this rampage. The theme of Jaws is man versus nature, a familiar trope seen among many novels or films. However, I would like to note that this novel was a cultural phenomenon. It was the inspiration for many famous books or movies we see today. But going back to the man versus nature complex, this novel showcases a triad of what society would deem three masculine men: a chief of the Amity Police Department, which is Martin Brody, an intelligent oceanographer, Matt Hooper, and a shark hunter who is Quint. And this battle between the three men and the shark becomes a war concerning the protection of male superiority. This fight is essentially a test to their masculinity and whether men really are stronger than nature, which this novel does indicate as being true in the end. So the big concept is that there is an anxiety about a possible loss in masculine power, and this anxiety would result in a non-functioning society if men did not play by their gender rule. Benchley could perhaps be enforcing the need for a return to a traditional lifestyle where men are the dominant superiors. So, for a little historical context to this novel, it was written during a transition that took place from a traditional conservative lifestyle to a more modernized sociable society. There were public protests, which was a rise in activism starting in the 1960s for social justice. And more specifically, there was a women's rights movement that occurred where women had gained newfound freedoms. In the 1970s, women were finally getting accepted into male-dominated businesses and universities. Opportunities and jobs that were once only reserved for men had been brought in to include women as well. However, this change had brought along many controversies. Many people did not favor this modernized society as they feared it would cause social problems. So, one method of analysis that I will be utilizing is gender studies, and this quote is from an article called Men, Masculinity, and Manhood Acts, which basically just talks about why some men behave the way they do. And it reads, "Men are usually biological males claiming rights and privileges attendant to membership in the dominant gender group. For an individual male to enjoy the benefits that derive from membership in the dominant gender group, he must present himself to others as a particular kind of social being, a man." So my method of analysis will include close readings of passages from the novel, as well as analyzing those passages through a gender and historical perspective, and utilizing arguments from other scholars concerning this debate. So my argument overall purpose for this project is to explore how the great white shark in Peter Benchley's novel Jaws symbolizes a threatening force against male superiority. I argue that the fight between man and animal in the novel is a war over gender, and that this close war had altered people's perception of great white sharks. This shark had become a threat to the male character's masculinity, and I feel that this is the reason why it made people fear this particular shark species, as it was always believed that in nature men are the most superior beings. But in most of this novel, this view was largely questioned. This becomes the grounds for my humanistic research questions. What are the consequences if one is thought to be stronger than man? Will patriarchy always prevail, and at what cost? These are just some arguments from other scholars, such as Gregory Phipps, who argues in his article Naturalism and Intersectionality in Peter Benchley's Jaws, that the novel focuses on portraying animal symbolism among race, gender, class, and sexuality. For example, Phipps argues that on page 271, when Quint yells to Brody, "I see your cock, you bastard," this had turned the quest to catch the shark into a struggle for supremacy, given this language of sexual competition. Another quote that Phipps discusses is when Brody is left, somewhat defeated, and tells Quint it's out of man's hands. But Quint doesn't accept this and says he is going to kill the shark, adding, "We have no choice." Quint does not accept that there is something a man cannot do, is what I and Phipps gather from this argument. Beryl Francis, in her article, Before and After Jaws, Changing Representations of Shark Attacks, talks about how before the novel Jaws was released, people did not fear great white sharks, or any species for that matter. It was only until the release that people began to get testosterone rushes. And media forms like newspapers or magazines dramatize sharks as monsters that viciously kill people. The third scholar is Peter Biskind, where he similarly talks about gender and mentions naturalism, specifically when he centers his argument around how the shark unmans him. Why you should care. Shark species are decreasing at alarming rates. Their populations have declined by about 71% since 1970, which is when the novel Jaws was released. The last 50 years have been pretty devastating for global shark populations. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I do hope that you gather some valuable information from this.